Hi, everyone. This is going to be a video on the Jesus and this generation controversy. It arises out of Jesus' statement at the Olivet Discourse to his disciples that is recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke identically. We give you the references here. And the controversial passage that we're talking about is generally translated the following way. Verily, I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. So, what is the controversy about this passage? We'll see that some Jewish critics of Jesus claim he could not be a prophet because he expected his return in one generation's time, 40 years approximately. Gerald Freelander, The Jewish Sources of the Sermon on the Mount, 1911, at 250 to 51. This is repeated frequently by modern critics of Jesus of a Jewish persuasion. However, we'll also see that C.S. Lewis also agrees with it. So, and he thinks Jesus does not have any prophetic powers. So that is a problem about C.S. Lewis that you're going to also learn about this. But that also shows that it is an objective question, meaning that even a Christian, someone who thinks he's a Christian, could believe that. And I think the minute you believe that Jesus isn't a prophet, well, you don't really believe in the Jesus of the Bible, because you have rejected the very thing that makes him have any importance to us. So I think C.S. Lewis is, I hope and pray he repented, but it's a fact. He said the same thing. And let me just read you what he said. And let's read what C.S. Lewis says. He despaired of finding a solution, is how I introduce this here. Lewis reluctantly conceded to the assertion of the skeptics that Jesus was in error. He attributed this to supposedly the limited knowledge Jesus had in his incarnate human form. He despairingly wrote, and I'll give you the cite in the end. Say what you like, we shall be told by some critics, the apocalyptic beliefs of the first Christians have been proved to be false. By the way, Paul clearly believed that Jesus was going to come before he died, and that didn't happen. So that proves Paul a false prophet. The question is Jesus false for even saying what he's saying in this passage, and does it mean how C.S. Lewis is even reading it? And again, this is based on a translation, and we're going to see there are 6 different meanings, 5 6 or 5 or 6 different meanings, 3 of which are not a false prophecy. We'll get into that. So C.S. Lewis goes on. It is clear from the New Testament that they all expected the second coming in their own lifetime. No, only Paul did that. And in fact, Jesus says, I don't know the day or hour when I'm coming back. So the Son doesn't even know. So Jesus gave no prophecy about it, but Paul had a certainty that it was going to happen in his lifetime. It is clear from the New Testament that they all expected the second coming in their own lifetime. And then again, that's false. Jesus said, I don't know. The Son doesn't even know when he's coming back. And worse still, they had a reason, and one which you will find very embarrassing. Their master had told them so. No, the master didn't tell them so. Paul dreamed it up on his own. Okay, so I'm just clarifying here. He shared and indeed created their delusion. And why would he use the word delusion? Because Paul said that Jesus, when he would, is someone who can bring delusions. Why would you say Jesus would bring a delusion or cause a delusion in his disciples? That's false. This prophet, see what he's done to our Christ? I loved C.S. Lewis until I actually thought about this passage, what he's saying. He said in so many words, this generation shall not pass till all these things be done. And he was wrong. No, he wasn't, Mr. Lewis. We'll see. He clearly knew no more about the end of the world than anyone else. And by the way, this is the same explanation that Luther gave of why Jesus thought the law was still in play. But Paul's going to go to his place where he's going to learn all these new realities, and he's going to learn, no, the laws was never intended to continue and has been abolished. Okay. And so the same thing is happening again here, where and so Jesus gets negated and he's said to be ignorant. And really what's happening here is Paul thinks that Jesus is coming in his own lifetime. And Jesus says, no, I don't even know when I'm coming back. In the full context of this, you'll see the context of this passage. And yet Jesus is being forced to have a translation of his words match Paul. And now, if you ask me, the only reason this is translated the way it is to make Paul not look foolish, and he's relying upon Jesus. So he's excused, But Jesus is ignorant compared to Paul. Paul knows best, and he relied upon Jesus, and that he should not have done. The Jesus of the earth. The Jesus of heaven is supposedly a different kind of Jesus, and he learned up there that the law was abrogated, and he communicated that only to Paul. Didn't kept it from the other 12, but Paul was getting this message, and that's why that explains why Paul and Jesus contradict there. And here we are to understand that Paul was wrong because he was relying upon Jesus about Jesus' return in the same quote generation. So now let's go back and take a look at this passage. So, oh wait, let me read the full quote here. It is certainly the most embarrassing verse in the Bible. Well, as translated, it is intended to defend Paul. As translated, it therefore makes Jesus look ignorant and Paul look like he was duped by Jesus. He had a delusion that Jesus caused. As Mr. Lewis's own words in English say, yet how teasing also that within 14 words of it should come the statement, but of the day and the hour knows no man, no, not the angels who which are in heaven, neither the Son, but the Father. Now I got to pause there. He should have realized if Jesus says, I don't know when I'm coming back, the Father only knows, right? That should tell uh, Mr. Lewis that Jesus isn't talking about his that there's something wrong in the translation. Let's put it that way. Mr. Lewis should say, hey, let me go back and study what people have found out about this. And he's writing this in 1960, so there's no excuse. There's plenty of scholarship out there. The one exhibition of error, meaning his mistake about this, and the one confession of ignorance go side by side. So he's saying Jesus proves he's wrong about it, and then Jesus says he's ignorant about it. And so instead of Mr. Lewis saying these two things are incongruent, that there has to be a different explanation, then Jesus is in error. If he even is admitting I don't even know what day or time it is, why would he say it's going to happen within a single generation of time? So that should have been the clue to Mr. Lewis that there's something textually incorrect in the English translation of the word or the English meaning of the word that he is seeing and hearing at the same time. Now let's go to his footnote so we can verify the source. This is footnote 11, C.S. Lewis, The World's Last Night, 1960. This is my own book, The Essential C.S. Lewis, at page 385. So that's clearly what he said, and I typed the whole thing up. So, okay, so now we'll get into the nitty. All right, I just want to be blunt with you. To me, that means Lewis lost his faith. If you can't resolve this, where it doesn't mean Jesus is a false prophet, and the others who believe that Jesus was coming in their lifetime, and the only one we know who thinks that way is Paul. If this is all about defending Paul and leaving Jesus in the gutter, it's just disgusting. But let's go look at the actual issues here, and we'll resolve them. It's very easy, actually, once you know some facts. Okay, so when you go to the Olivet Discourse, you have to know that Jesus is being asked two different things at the same time. So he can be answering one question and not the other, and yet people read them together. So he was asked, when would the temple be destroyed? And what is the sign that people should expect that will herald the end of the world and the return of Christ? Then it says here, this is my article online, the juxtaposition of the two questions in Matthew and the two answers has led readers to assume they are asking about the same general time, and thus the answer is supposedly the same general time. That was an assumption in the question, but it is not necessarily present in the answer. Clearly, because the question was put as one thing to him all at one time. We have so many questions for you. Here's 1 and 2, and Jesus takes and breaks them down 1 and 2, and answers 1, and that's one time period, and answers number 2, which is a different time period. That was an assumption in the question. Clearly, it was an assumption evident in the expectation of disciples that both events are near to one another, i.e., that the temple's destruction would happen around the same time as the second coming of Christ. So Jesus had been telling them this temple will fall and be destroyed. Okay, and then they're asking, when will these things happen, and when will be the sign of your return? Okay, let's take a break. Okay, so what the solution here I'm proposing is it may be that two time periods are connected by many commentators by a hasty assumption in reading the passage. Okay, that would include Mr. Lewis. Okay, he thinks something that is improper to go that direction. Jesus very well did not likely mean to connect his second coming to the temple destruction. So let's say Jesus was talking about, he could have meant these events of the temple that would happen in the generation of that people. Okay, so that answer could have been meaning 40 years, but he was talking about the temple destruction. So that's one answer. But I'm going to show you another answer, which is it could even apply to the separately apply to the return of Christ, and that's probably how he meant it, and we'll see why. Thus, as many read the passage as critics who claim Jesus a false prophet read it, or an ignorant person who can't be a prophet. That's C.S. Lewis. Jesus supposedly leads his disciples to believe his prophecies of the calamities would take place at the same time the temple would be destroyed, which event took place in 70 AD, if you did not know that. And here's the quote again. Was that a false prophecy? This generation shall not pass away till all be fulfilled. How could it be this generation would see the end times calamities, including Christ's return, which necessarily is in the future, yet the temple was destroyed almost 2,000 years ago? How can all these things, the temple destruction and Christ's return, both have taken place in this generation, when one of the two prophecies has taken place 2,000 years ago, but not the other? Okay, so a Jewish critic who believes Jesus is a false prophet argues this way. Jesus explicitly describes his second coming. So now he's connecting it only with the issue of second coming. And as I said, it could be just the temple destruction he's talking about, this generation. Or if you look at the words all things and you think it has to be the summation of both the temple and his return, which is possible, the word generation then has to be looked at as what could Jesus have been talking about in terms of the second coming, and what is the meaning of the word there in Greek? Is it a generation of 40 years, as it could be if we were just looking at the temple destruction issue, and that clearly would fit a 40-year time span because Jesus is crucified around 33 AD, and the destruction of the temple occurs exactly 37 years later, less than one generation. All right. So a Jewish critic to review again, Jesus explicitly describes his second coming. At that time, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and all the nations of the earth will mourn. That's 24, verse 30. And that's 4 verses later, he makes this generation remark. So this reader is connecting it to the second coming, which is possible. I'm not saying it's not possible, and we're going to prove that it's possible. It will be, but what he doesn't want to do is he doesn't want to connect this generation as a reference to the temple destruction, which he's also talking about, and which this verse could actually be talking about instead, just to show you. But we're going to go with his argument. We're going to not be stubborn. We're going to go, okay, second coming. Does the word genea, in this case, fit Jesus' second coming in the future? Okay, so then he says it will involve suffering never to be equaled again, Matthew 24:21. This did not happen when the temple was destroyed. Well, that's actually not true. And one of the reasons why is I recently learned this is that the temple was occupied by over 1 million people at the time that the Romans were sieging it in what turned out to be 70 AD. At the end of 9 months, the death toll, according to all records, are over 1 million occupants of that temple structure. They all died. And that is a horrific event in world history. And populations were so small in those days that we're talking that's like a 30 million population city of today. To have 1 million people in that era die, and just to give you another comparison, is compared to the bombing of Hiroshima. Now, while I don't want to downplay the horrificness of that event and the tragedy of all those people dying, it was 44,000 people, not 1 million people. Now, they suddenly died. That's true. This was a 9-month ordeal, but every month, 100,000 people were dying in that 9-month period. So this is virtually the same thing every day, all day for 9 straight months. Although obviously the the Romans had time periods where they weren't attacking. Anyway, so, but here's the question: will there be a problem if Jesus is clearly referring to his second coming? And that's what this video article is about. What this online article is about is primarily to say, no, even if you looked at it from that perspective, it is not a problem, contrary to what Mr. Lewis says or what the some Jewish critics say. All right, so the word in this verse, in all three of these passages, is in Greek, genea, Genea. Now, there's another word that would more directly have been, had it been used, that would directly mean a race or kind of people, genos, Genos. So, had it said genos, we wouldn't even have this controversy if Jesus is talking about his second coming, and that only would be saying this race of people, this ethnic people, meaning the Jews, will be here when I return. Or it could even potentially have meant this a group of people who cohere as my followers, Christians. They will be here when I return. But more likely, he's talking about the Jewish people if he had said genos. So with genos, we would have never had an issue. Now the question is genea, Genea, ever used to mean genos in Greek literature, that we can prove that? And we're going to find out the answer is yes, at least 3 different times by top Greek writers. So, according to Gleason Archer, he says sometimes the word genea was used as a synonym of genos, meaning race or stock or nation or a people. Archer writes, although this meaning for genea is not common, it is found as early as Homer. We're talking about several centuries before Christ. Herodotus, also multiple centuries before Christ, and as late as Plutarch, which is within the last 100 years of before Christ. So right up to the time period of this event, in where Jesus is speaking at in the Olivet Discourse, there are clear examples from Greek history of this other usage of genea as genos. We're also going to see that English is identical. We also use the word generation also to mean a race, kind, or ethnic group. But let me give you the citation here. So now this is Archer, and he cites in comparison the Liddell and Scott Greek Lexicon, 9th edition, Oxford, 1940, at page 342. I'll take a break. I want to drop to footnote 4 and show you the citation from Archer. Okay, so footnote 4 to the article gives this reference: Gleason L. Archer, Encyclopedia of Bible Difficulties, Zondervan, 1982, at page 338 to 339. Incidentally, I will put a cite to this article so you can read this in more depth and do more studies yourself. Okay, and I want to show you how Wikipedia handles this. They say this genea is being a reference to the second coming. Remember, I mentioned it could be Jesus was talking about the temple, but we'll assume it was referring to the second coming. And then Wikipedia never mentions there's any other meaning other than a generation of 40 years. So Jesus' second coming didn't occur in 40 years. Therefore, Wikipedia is leaving you to conclude, just like C.S. Lewis did, that Jesus is a false prophet. So let's read what they say. Wikipedia sidesteps these issues by defining genea, citing the typical definition of genea, but ignoring that it sometimes was a synonym of genos or race, as we showed you from Homer, Herodotus, and Plutarch. All right, so this is what it says. The Bauer Lexicon, since updated by Arndt and Gingrich of Koine Greek, states that genea means the, quote, sum total of those born at the same time, expanded to include all those living at a given time, generation, contemporaries, end of quote. They don't cite any other meaning. Robinson Greek and English lexicon states that genea means, quote, the interval of time between father and son from 30 to 40 years, those living in any one period, this present generation. Okay. So now, did they leave anything out? Did they look at any of the best lexicon of all is Liddell Scott. Everybody knows that. Okay. I mean, there's no question about that. So let's look at what Liddell Scott says. This is Liddell Scott. The Greek English Lexicon of the New Testament provides the following. These are the definitions. A begetting, birth, nativity, that doesn't apply. That which has been begotten, men of the same stock of family. That's this ethnic stock. Same stock, same lineage, so on. 2a, the several ranks of natural descent, the successive members of a genealogy. Again, that can be an ethnic people as they grow successively over many, many generations of living beings. And that can be called a genea, but it can be translated also as generation. And that's the question. Uh, which way should it have been done? Should it be done as a the kind or the nation or the people or other words to those effect? 2b, it could be a group of men very like each other in endowments, pursuits, or character. And that's what I said. It could be Christians, theoretically. These people of mine, they will not disappear. And there's some suggestion he's talking in that sense. But regardless, let's just take it. If it has any chance, we'll just assume he meant Jewish people. So that's what it means. And the only meanings that don't agree are uh, 3 and 4. The whole multitude of men living at the same time, and 4, an age that is a time ordinarily occupied by each successive generation, a space of 30 to 33 years. So if you said a generation, you're saying in this generation or that generation, it happens, in a 40-year time span of what it takes to have children in a normal cycle. All right. Now we'll pause and we'll come right back. Okay, so let's take a look at Venerable Bede. He wrote around the 800s. He recognized that what the meaning of this text was. He said, Bede says, quote, by generation, he either means the whole race of mankind or especially the Jews. That's correct. Then Theophylactus wrote between 1055 and 1085 AD that he saw that Jesus meant the generation of Christians, meaning all of us. And then he quotes, or else this generation shall not pass away. That is the generation of Christians, until all things be fulfilled, which were spoken concerning Jerusalem and the coming of Antichrist. For he does not mean the generation of the apostles, for the greater part of the apostles did not live up to the destruction of Jerusalem. But he says this of the generation of Christians, wishing to console his disciples, lest they should believe that the faith should fail at that time. For the immovable elements shall first fail before the words of Christ fail. Wherefore it is added, heaven and earth shall pass away, but not my word shall pass away. So what he's saying is, we can tell also from circumstances that Jesus didn't mean the generation living at that time because the apostles did not survive. And that actually is a legitimate argument, is that if you believe Jesus prophesied the temple correctly, which he does in answering that question, when will that happen? He prophesies that. Why would you think he would make a blunder prophecy about himself and then coming back, a second coming? And again, and then why would you interpret him making a blunder when he also says 4 verses later that the son doesn't even know when he's coming back? So why would you infer that Jesus said that these events will occur uh, in this generation, giving a 40-year timeline when he said in context of only 4 verses later that I don't even know the timeline? See, so it has to have a meaning other than a time-specific event. And when Jesus said this generation, meaning the ethnic group of Jews particularly, will not go away until all these things happen, he's saying the Jews will still be here at his second coming, which means that doesn't have any, Jesus doesn't have any have to have any knowledge of the timeline at all to know that Jewish people will survive until he comes back. So anyway, this is not an unreasonable construction by giving Jesus some credence as getting it right on the temple destruction, and he should be given some credence therefore on his knowing he wasn't coming back within this generation, and even saying I'm not, but he was talking therefore as a stock of people. All right. Jerome, an early church leader, translator of Greek and Hebrew from about 400 AD, believed that Jesus was referring to the offspring of man, and in particular to the offspring of Jews in Matthew 24, verse 34, just as we said. So let's listen to what Jerome says. And he's a good, he speaks Latin. He's a good translator of Greek and a good translator of Latin, and that's why he did the Latin Vulgate Bible, which is a translation of the Hebrew Bible and of the Greek New Testament. By generation here, he means, Jerome says, the whole human race, and the Jews in particular. And he adds, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away, to confirm their faith in what has gone before, as though he had said, it is either to destroy things solid and immovable, then that ought should fail of my words. All right. So, and now I just want to refer to another authority just to consider, the Scofield Bible. Let's take a look at the Scofield Reference Bible, and I want to look at, in particular, his reference to Dean Henry Alford, who was a very reputable scholar of his day. I think he was in the 1800s. He gave strong evidence for this view of the nation or kind or people view, the race, kind, family, stock, or breed view. And this is what he says. Building upon the connection with the reference to the nation Israel as a fruitless tree, Matthew 24:29-30, thus obviating recourse to an AD 70 fulfillment, he explains, quote, as this is one of the points on which the rationalizing interpreters lay most stress to show that the prophecy has failed, it may be well to show that genea has in Hellenistic Greek the meaning of a race or family of people. So I already told you that in the Herodotus, Omer, and Plutarch. And he's now citing Jeremiah 8, verse 3 in the Septuagint. So we'd have to go there and see, is it translating an ethnic people to be the meaning of the word in Greek? That's a Greek translation of the Old Testament. So was the Hebrew Bible word at that point meaning the race, kind, or nation? And that's what Dean Alford said. So I'm going to take it to the bank unless somebody wants to go look that up and tell me I'm wrong. But that makes sense to me. And he says, compare chapter 23, verse 36, and with it also Ibid, verse 35. So he has Jeremiah 23, verse 36, but also look at verse 35. And he uses the word ephanuesate. But this generation did not, and he's now quoting it, but this generation did not slay Zechariah, so that the whole people are addressed. So he's saying it meant the whole people of Judaism or Jewish people. See also chapter 12, verse 45, in which the meaning absolutely requires this sense. So he's again saying Jeremiah 12, verse 45. He says, see also Luke 17:25, Matthew 17:17, Luke 16, verse 8, Acts 2, verse 40. I guess it's Philippians or Philemon, I don't know, 2, verse 15. In all these places, genea is equal to genos, or nearly so. And this is at Alford, volume 1, page 244, according to the Scofield Bible. He continues. Alford also points out that the usage of parakomai, pass away, in Matthew 24:34, obviously, and in verse 35, militates for their connection and usage in the same sense. Bishop J.C. Ryle also took the same view and referenced Mede, Paroas, Facius, Illyricus, Alovius, Gesenius, Duval, Adam Clark, and Steer as early advocates of this view. See J.C. Ryle, Expository Thoughts on the Gospels, New York, Robert Carter, 1875, at page 323-24. Okay, so I think what we have is lots of proof that this is not a made-up viewpoint. This is actually legitimately scholarly based. You can look at the Septuagint Bible, so that's something that can't be changed. So we'll assume for the moment, unless I have time, I'm going to assume that his citations are correct. So you have overwhelming proof that this meaning of this word genea can mean genos, meaning kind or ethnic group. So I think that answers the question. And so I would just say C.S. Lewis and the Jewish critics I've referenced here earlier are incorrect, that this doesn't have only one meaning that makes Jesus a false prophet. I know C.S. Lewis didn't use the word false prophet, but he just basically did too. He said he didn't know what he was saying. He made a prophecy that didn't come true, so he doesn't have to use the words. So, but he didn't mean it in a negative way. He just meant, it's just, I didn't know this, but he also said at the same time, I don't know when I'm coming back. So he didn't see the solution. So the solution is when Jesus says, I didn't know I'm coming back, he's talking about the second coming. And if the reference to genea, that this generation will not pass away until all these things happen. And if he means to include the second coming in that, then the word genea meant there, this race of people, the Jewish people, will not pass away until he comes back again. So let's look at how the verse would be re-understood. Verily I say unto you that this people group, the Jewish people, shall not pass away until all things be done. So all these things will happen. The fulfillment, including Jesus' return, will happen. But these people shall not pass away. They will be alive, or they will exist. So instead of it being a generation of 40 years that would be alive, or some part of them, it will be this people group will be alive up to the moment that at least up to the moment all these things take place, and including his return in glory. Okay, so I think this should settle the issue. And all I can say is to the opponents of this, C.S. Lewis included, that you are unnecessarily and incorrectly sniping at Jesus, a person of great virtue and who showed prophetic ability about the Temple of Jerusalem falling. He should be given credit that he didn't commit a mistake here either. And in his Hebrew language being translated into Greek, genea can mean genos, and that is apparently what it meant here. Now, I just want to throw out one other thing is it could have been very much so that in that era, people did handwriting. So these were not carefully typed mechanical characters on the page. Like we can see EA is not the same as OS, but it's hard to say that in that era, if somebody didn't write very carefully, you could mistake OS for EA, and that would be a plausible other explanation. It could be simply an original copy of Matthew, in particular, what people also call the Q source, or I would say is the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. It could have had OS and it had EA instead, but it turns out the difference between OS and EA is grammatically not significantly different. You can have it also mean genos, and we have abundant proofs of that here. Okay, I hope that helps explain and provide I believe, conclusive proof that it's inconclusive that this was a false prophecy of Jesus Christ, and that he didn't know what he was saying. And I would actually say, if he says later, "I don't know when I'm coming back," it's very clear. It either was a poor copying effort and it was genos, or if it was genea, it was clearly intended by the translator, to the best of their ability, to understand that that Jesus meant, because Jesus didn't speak in Greek, that Jesus meant this word would mean the race, kind, or ethnic people, and obviously he would have meant the Jews. Okay, God bless everybody. Take care. Ciao. I'm just going to add one little thing here at the end, that it was posted at this blog, the Mere C.S. Lewis blog. Uh, it's a daily jolt of Java from C.S. Lewis. And the very words that I was quoting to you from that article or work of 1960 by C.S. Lewis is right here, January 7, 2014. And he titles this introduction as "The Most Embarrassing Verse in the Bible." And there it is. It's an excerpt 4 of 7 of this work. And he says, "Say what you like, we shall be told the apocalyptic beliefs of the first Christians have then proved to be false," and so on and so forth. So this literally has the thing, and it cites C.S. Lewis 1960. So just as my book said, here it is, and it's at this blog here, the merricklewis.blogspot.com/2014/01/ the most embarrassing verse in the Bible. And you could also just search the words and it'll come up. Okay, I hope that helps. God bless. Take care. Ciao. Bye.